Hello, my name is James Haynes of the Epsom Newell Times. We're at the North East Surrey College of Technology in the constituency of Epsom Newell. Today is Monday the 17th of June 2024 and I'm interviewing the True and Fair Party candidate Gina Miller. Welcome.
Hello, Jane.
Why do you want to be an MP in the constituency of Epsom Newell?
I've been a campaigner for about 34 years, and all that knowledge and experience that I've gained is something that I want to now give to the people of Epsom and Newell and offer my help, the connections I've made, the experiences I've had in helping people who have been affected by the negative effects of society.
Okay. The problem for young people at the moment is conscription. Do you think that conscripting is wrong for young adults?
I think it's the most ludicrous sort of back of a fag packet idea that they ever came up with. It's just not going to work. I mean, the infrastructure, on a serious note, for the armed forces, all the generals I've spoken to have said this absolutely not even going to get off the ground.
A big issue for Epsom at the moment is the green belt. Is there a suitable compromise for building more adequate housing whilst maintaining the green belt?
Absolutely. I was on the Greenbelt demonstration on Saturday. There's absolutely no need whatsoever to build on Greenbelt if you brownfield first and then also look at change of usage, incentives such as reducing stamp duty on downsizing. There is more than enough accommodation without building on Greenbelt.
And a more national topic, do you support building more nuclear power stations?
I think the modern sort of small mini nuclear power stations have to be part of the transition to our green supply of energy. They're a small part of it, but there are so many other parts that we need to also be looking at.
Do you think Brexit has been a success?
I cannot find one indicator of how Brexit has been a success. It's been the biggest disaster. I mean, we've basically not just shot ourselves in the foot, but in the arms as well. I mean, anyone who says it's okay for us to be losing up to £1 billion a year when we are in so dire need of funding for our public services, when we have a world that's so geopolitically unstable, we have to be part of the union.
So you would like to rejoin the EU?
It's not possible right now. The EU wouldn't have its back, and also it's not the right time for us. But at one point, I think we should be looking at an associated membership.
So other than yourself as party leader, who do you think would make the best Prime Minister from other parties?
Well, there's no way as a small party I'd ever be Prime Minister in my wildest dreams. But I worry about the lack of courage in leadership at the moment. And as a straight answer, I think it's got to be Keir Starmer. But I do worry about him having the courage to actually bring the changes, looking at the really big issues we have coming down the track, such as climate change, aging of our population, digital revolution. We need really brave thinking.
If elected, what are your priorities to improve the lives of residents in Epsom and Newell?
Absolutely petitioning the government for a pot so that we can pioneer a wellbeing economy here in Epsom, Newell, Ashton and Leatherhead. And that's revitalising the high street and bringing in early intervention to relieve the health service, but also the fact that 80% of the health of our population depends on social factors. So we need to really be looking at a different economic model.
What are your plans to improve mental health services in the UK?
Well, that's absolutely tied to a wellbeing economy. I mean, the health of our nation, as I said, is affected by so many other social factors such as housing, working conditions, education. We have to tackle all of those things. But having 5.3 million people off work, many of them due to mental health issues, is hitting our productivity, our innovation, our creativity, and is a massive, massive drain. It's 4.3 billion it's costing us on having people out of work. That's just not good enough.
You plan to abolish the current Ofsted grading system in schools. How will schools unbiasedly reflect the quality of their education standards?
Well, look at what happened before Ofsted. Ofsted was not there all the time. Schools were perfectly good at reporting how they were doing to their parents and to local authorities. So it's looking at a system in consultation with institutions, educational institutions, that they think is fairer.
Do you think the abolition of non-elected peers in the House of Lords is overdue?
There are so many changes at the House of Lords that are overdue. We need to halve the size of the House of Lords. We need to actually see every appointment in the House of Lords through the lens of what it's there to do constitutionally, which is there as an elected oversight chamber. And that's what it should be. And I'm afraid the first start of that transition is to get rid of the hereditary peers who are only there because of the luck of birth.
What is your vision for public health services in the UK, and where is the balance struck between private and publicly funded healthcare?
It always goes back to wellbeing economy. I would transition to wellbeing economy because our NHS model was built in the 1950s and still operating with 1970s IT systems. It's totally broken and it's not sustainable for the population that we will have in the future. So we do need to look at a different model, early intervention in communities, so the NHS goes back to being free at the point of service, but for emergencies, not for everything that goes wrong in life.
Moving on. How should the UK handle our relationship with China?
Interesting. We have to be around the table with China because they are the biggest polluter in the world, along with the US. So we have to be there talking to them. But we also have to be critical friends and be very careful about what they're doing. Because if you look at the Belt and Road project, they are very ambitious in wanting to take over the world, as it were. And one of the things I start talking to them about is what we are not seeing, but is happening, which is undersea drilling. They're destabilizing the seabed. And that would be seismic disaster for us all if they're allowed to carry on.
Should the UK be doing more to support Ukraine?
We're doing an awful lot to support Ukraine. What we should be doing is making sure that when Mr. Trump, if he wins, I think he will win in the US, that he then carries on funding the Ukraine. Our role is on the international stage, using our soft power and making sure that other countries can give more to the Ukraine.
So would you support Donald Trump in his US election campaign?
I definitely do not support him in his US campaign, but I'm a realist that I think all the indicators, even in the swing states, are that he's going to win.
A national issue is the rail industrial strikes. They've been unresolved since June 2022. How would you approach resolving this?
We've got to get round the table and be realistic. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when the rail services were privatised, and I can tell you, were nationalised, and I can tell you they were a disaster. The food, the service, the cleaning, the conditions was awful. So it has to be better. First thing we need to start doing is to review the contracts that are coming up for renewal or ending, and see how we can get a better service at a better cost and better investment from these companies.
Do you support ULEZ coverage in all London boroughs, and should it be in Epsom and Ewell as well?
ULEZ was a disaster from the fact that it's not in its concept, but the data it was based on and the way it was brought in. And I think we need to halt it and have a complete review of how we progress, if we progress, and where we progress with ULEZ.
In your party's policy proposals for the environment sector, there's a plan to cut bonuses of water company executives who harm waterways. How does your plan differ to the Environment Secretary's plan?
So our plan is much bigger than that. It's actually to put ecocide into law, to make it criminal for any organisation to harm the environment. So that would be to align ourselves with what the US is planning, what the EU brought in March of this year, and the EU countries will be doing it in 2 years' time. We have to bring ecocide into law.
On a more personal note for Epsom and Ewell, do you think Epsom and Ewell is well served by having its council governed by resident associate councillors?
I'm very sceptical of the lack of transparency and opacity in local government, and I think there has to be a complete overhaul of how we actually scrutinise local government, and that includes councillors.
Do you have any Republican leanings?
I'm more concentrated on UK politics. I'm very interested in what's going on around the world because we're not an island unto ourselves, but my focus is domestic.
And what is your view on the first past the post electoral system?
It is the most outdated, unfair voting system. We have to have a root and branch reform of our electoral system. We have to go to proportional representation, and I would suggest that that's done through regional citizens' assemblies to decide what form of proportional representation is brought in.
Okay, thank you, Gina, that I was a true and fair party. That's all my questions.